Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe, your host, here with Kyle. So today we are going to chat about a couple things. We wanted to kind of dig into, call it 4 or 5 different use cases for psychedelics. And we want to kind of discuss them at length because we feel like people who are into one form of use aren't necessarily supportive or maybe even be totally negative towards people interested in the other ones. So it's kind of just giving each other, each subset of people kind of context around each use case so that, you know, we can understand each other a little better. You know, this is a pretty small subculture and we got to get along and we got to respect each other's opinions and experiences. Kyle, do you have anything to preface this with, this whole digging in discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a topic that comes up, and I think we kind of address it in the course on different types of experiences and different types of uses. And yeah, I think there's like it is weird because there's a lot of push for therapeutic use, but also I've known people that have very therapeutic recreational uses as well, and a lot of people come into this with recreational use, and to go back and forth, yeah, I don't know, it's just it seems like a good conversation to have, to talk about the different types of use and experiences. So and yeah, it's kind of like archetypes where there's like a positive and a negative side to certain archetypes, like yin and yang kind of thing. It's one entity but it has two sides. So I think maybe we should jump into therapeutic use. Like obviously there's science coming out. FDA just started to fast track the MDMA trials. So I think that means MAPS is going to get extra support from the FDA to get through phase 3 sooner because it's a breakthrough therapy now. They just consider. Yeah. Is that
something you've heard of before, or is that like kind of like with vaccines for cutting edge or new diseases? They're like, oh shit, we got to get this out really quick. Let's fast track this thing. We'll call it breakthrough. Like, I wonder if that's a general designation or not.
I think I was reading a little bit about it, and they were saying that, I don't know, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I did a little bit of research on it because that was the first time I've heard of it, of breakthrough therapy. And it seems like they identify, say, a drug treatment that has significant potential and there's like nothing else out there like it. And so, yeah, I don't know if necessarily it's fast tracking, but I think maybe putting a lot more support on it than maybe it normally would. But yeah, it was the first time I've heard of it. And somebody on Facebook mentioned that this might be the first breakthrough therapy for like a psychiatric disorder, because it seems like most of it might be based around like a breakthrough therapy for cancer or AIDS or whatever.
Because there's no other breakthrough psychiatric meds right now. I don't think we've had a new great psychiatric med in, I don't know what, 15 years, like since SSRIs happened. Like we haven't had too many breakthroughs that I'm aware of, at least.
Yeah, no.
I pulled it up here, man. It's a 2012 act, the FDA Safety and Innovation Act, and that allowed for this breakthrough status that gives them a priority review. So it says the FDA will work with the sponsor to expedite the approval process. This can include a rolling review, smaller clinical trials, and alternative trial design. So in short, it might be less work than the phase 3 plan was planned to be. Like they could potentially cut out some of that work, which would be pretty neat. We'll find out what that actually means, but you know, to us, MDMA is pretty safe, especially in a pharmaceutical setting and clinical environment for the ingestion therapy. So yeah, like, it's pretty cool. So like, when you think psychedelic therapy in a therapeutic context, do you mostly think back to the trainings you took with the Midhofers, like around MDMA therapy?
Yeah, I do, and I also. My mind goes back to the early research when they were doing a lot of this stuff. So using psychedelics as tools to help with various mental disorders. and using it in like a clinical setting to help work through whatever is there within the psyche or body, whatever. So yeah, that's the way I see it. Is using it kind of like in a clinical setting to help with a mental disorder or anything else that's going on. And but then there's like that weird crossover, and maybe that's in the ceremonial text, but like, for thousands of years, indigenous people have been using plant medicines for other healing. So it's not just mental; it might be for spiritual or physical ailments as well. But yeah, for this therapeutic use, I think of it as like clinical setting and using a dose to help with processing some of that internal emotions or whatever you want to call it.
And you're right, because there is this crossover with ceremonial and therapeutic, and it's hard to really draw a real line on it. So we've kind of partnered with Myco Meditations. I kind of forgot that we were going to talk about this, but so Eric Osborne, who had one of the most popular episodes on our show, I think it was like the 4th or 5th most popular episode of all time, which is only a little over a year, I guess. But he is considering his work therapy because he's not bringing a ceremonial aspect to it in like a cultural appropriation sense. So maybe in our world, like in this Western world, like our culture, the therapeutic setting is the ceremonial setting, maybe in a weird kind of way. Like I think we need to think more philosophically sometimes about a lot of this stuff, because we don't I don't think we do that enough, and we're just like quick to judge.
Well, psychology has really moved away from philosophy, and philosophy really influenced psychology early on. I mean, a lot. And it is, in my mind, and maybe that's just my bias because, we've studied a lot with, say, people that are philosophically influenced. That's a huge gap, and I think it needs to kind of merge back together to gain some insight on how to use some of these, or just to influence our perception on how to work with mind, body, spirit.
Yeah, and words have power. Words shape our reality tunnel in a lot of ways, and I think it's part of this movement's path to really understand that we have a lot more power in our world than we currently think we do. Mm-hmm. We're one MDMA session away from not having PTSD after 20 years, that kind of thing. That's not always the case, but it's not entirely untrue, that kind of thing. So, our words and how we frame arguments and how we argue with each other on particular subjects there's a lot going on when we talk to each other. There's if we walked away from each other and say, okay, what was Kyle saying? Okay, what was Joe saying? And we might have very entirely different stories about what was going on. Or like a classic Robert Anton Wilson thing is you got 100 people in the room describing a person on stage or describing the situation in the theater or room. They're all going to have different stories.
Right.
Some people might even have literal hallucinations that like the guy over there in the yellow coat wearing a weird mask. Like he clearly wasn't there. So yeah, there's all sorts of room there. Okay, so back to go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's interesting about like how Eric's going to be doing that. And so he's kind of phrasing it therapeutic.
Yeah, absolutely. So he's actually working with people with symptoms. I think they're doing some screening. So like people that it's not a good case for, you can't really go. But if you're a good candidate, you're going down there and doing therapeutic doses on the beach in Jamaica. So the one that's really cool is coming up features Catherine McLean, who we've had on the show, and Kyle, you've met up with her a few times. And actually at the MAPS conference, I got to spend a bunch of time with her on this cruise in the San Francisco Bay. It was pretty fun. We got to chat all about therapy, the future of psychedelics, and the universe. So it's pretty friggin' awesome. So she's going to be down there, I think, giving some talks about psychedelic therapies, what it's like to work in psychedelic states, and I think a lot on integration, because that's kind of one of her specialty areas is psychedelic integration. So also Shane Moss, the comedian, who's I think he kind of headlined with Duncan Trussell at the MAPS conference.
He did.
Yeah. And he did like the biggest ever psychedelic comedy tour. He did well over 100 stops, I think, all over the country. Recently, just drove himself all over the country. And I actually got to shake his hand recently at the Boulder DMT-X event. He was in the audience.
No way.
He's pushing really hard to be #1 test pilot.
Cool.
So he's working Daniel McQueen over pretty hard for #1. So those two will be there. Shane's got a ton of psychedelic experience, I think, as part of developing comedy and stuff to talk about with his psychedelic comedy tour. He had to do a bunch of drugs. So, freebase DMT, all that kind of stuff. And Jonathan Thompson, psychedelic parenting, he'll be there as well. So that's a pretty star-studded cast. You got Eric Osborne, Catherine McLean, Jonathan Thompson, Eric Osborne. And you could check that out if you want to dig into that. It's legal mushrooms in Jamaica, in Treasure Beach, I think it's called. So it's like the west coast of Jamaica, and a really nice, cool place. So check that out, mycomeditations.com. Sorry for that weird segue, but a lot of people are asking, like, how can I do this stuff legally? How do I not have to go into the middle of a rainforest to do a certain substance that's legal? This is a decent option. It's still a jungle, it's still tropical, which might be a plus for some folks, especially when is this one? November 26th? Yeah. It's when everything starts getting cold and rough. So yeah.
Yeah, and Jamaica's not too far away.
No, I love Jamaica. I really, really, really want to go check out what Eric's doing down there. And there is a chance we'll be able to do some breath work down there with Eric. So stay tuned, listeners.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm wondering too, like, what you think about like the therapeutic use. It is kind of tricky. Like you just brought that up about like he's kind of stating it as therapy, and I don't know how it is down in Jamaica. It's probably totally different. But here in the States, I mean, that's probably like a huge ethical issue to say that you're doing therapy with not being like a licensed professional. So it is interesting. Like when I think of like psychedelic therapy in that sense, doing it in a therapeutic context, like I'm thinking that, with a licensed professional, somebody that has a background in either psychiatry, counseling, psychology, a master's or a PhD or something like that. And it is like this weird thing where you have people that could probably have really great experience and probably can facilitate that therapeutic context, but like in the sense of ethics and
I don't know. I think people
like
gotta relax. I get it. Like obviously there's possible medical interactions, but you can pretty easily screen for those or contraindications. And people put in sometimes 12 years to become doctors, so I kind of get it. Like they're incentivized to not allow for a more peer-to-peer based model. So I'm actually looking at Eric's website right now. Let me read this real quick. Mycomeditations retreats are focused but flexible. You can participate in our topic-based discussions or take time for yourself. This is your experience and it should take the shape you want it to. Mycomeditations does not endeavor to be compared to ayahuasca tourism. While we deeply respect the work of those shamans, this is not our model. Our retreats are for those who are looking for middle ground between the intuitive and the intellectual. Our facilitators are not shamans or healers, but they do have years of experience in dosing and holding space for the first time and experienced voyagers. So it's kind of, in a way, very similar to the way we talk about breath work. So, they offer connections to licensed therapists back home, kind of the same way we say this is an adjunct to therapy. Like, hopefully you're in therapy back home and you do this and then you go back to therapy and you hopefully can work through a lot of that material. I think Eric said Catherine might be made available for some aftercare counseling stuff over Skype. And I think Eric's wife might be a therapist too, who would be offering kind of integration coaching. So, there's obviously, if you're going to go do mushrooms for a bunch of days and you're actually symptomatic, hopefully you're in therapy already. And hopefully you're going to be in therapy when you come back. So like, it's just like anything, right? Like I went and got a bunch of surgeries. I had to do a bunch of stuff before the surgeries, and I've been doing stuff for a year after the surgeries. It's, one intervention out of a series of interventions. And, so obviously 5 days of heavy doses of mushrooms in a beautiful environment like that, I think would be very therapeutic, especially if you're able to like kind of, I want to say kind of choose your own adventure, but I don't really know the best way to put it. Eric and I talked a bunch of times the last couple of weeks, and it sounds like there is room for a lot of that. Like if you're super spiritual, you can do it more spiritually. If you're kind of an atheist neuroscience type, like you can do it that way too. It's, totally fine, whatever way you choose to do it, which is nice. It's the same way I approach breath work. Like if you're a really wild, deep into your yoga kind of person, like that's great. And if you're not, if you're exclusively into like the Broncos Patriots rivalry, like there's room for you too. It's not, there's no limits. But yeah, therapeutic use, man. I think a lot of this revolves around insurance companies and people just trying to kind of cover their ground. Like I don't want to devalue what doctors, researchers, and licensed therapists are doing, but I feel like we have to find a new way. In the same way, like capitalism is collapsing, the federal government's collapsing, universities are collapsing. Like I think this idea of licensure may, in a lot of ways, collapse for a lot of industries. I think I still want a licensed airline pilot and a licensed heart surgeon. But, for stuff that might be less crucial, maybe it's okay to go to an unlicensed mechanic for your car. Maybe they're skirting taxes or something, but that's something you got to deal with outside of that.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of therapists are switching to coaching because they get sick of the insurance thing. But, also, too, with the therapeutic thing, something that just popped in my mind, I think, to kind of, stay on that conversation of what it is. So I posted that MDMA, that breakthrough therapy on Instagram, and then somebody reposted it, and then somebody was like, oh, well, that's not, that's like dangerous, it's a high abuse drug and this and that, and they were just kind of like downplaying it. But I chimed in and said, well, the way that they're using it is not just in this recreational setting. They're not just giving people MDMA and having them do whatever. Like there's pre-sessions, you're getting therapy also during the MDMA session, and then you're having a bunch of follow-up sessions. So I think like that therapeutic use also entails a lot of therapy before, and then kind of like that therapeutic container during, and then a lot of therapy and integration work afterwards. And something really interesting, I was just had a conversation with somebody about ketamine clinics, and they were talking about how they were like one of the first people to get treated with ketamine in the US, supposedly, and they just sent me some articles. And so I was looking up a place in New Jersey that does ketamine infusions, and I was just seeing if they had like any therapy attached to it. And it doesn't seem like it. It just seems like they give you an infusion, go on your way. And my guess is that that's the treatment. They're not doing therapy there. They're just giving you a treatment. And then, probably like breath work too. It's like you're coming here for like an experience, psycho-spiritual development, whatever it is. Here's this drug. We're using it off label to help treat your depression. But then you go afterwards and do therapy.
Yeah, like maybe what we're reacting to is a little bit of lack of nuance in people's discussion of this stuff. It's like there's a lot more to the equation than a single session with somebody, and maybe that's something that's missing from the conversation, is that people are thinking, yeah, it's doing the drug and then going home and then you're fixed, and it's not that. And everybody says it's not that, but I don't know. It's just something that needs to be solved in the community, because people just don't seem to get it, and people seem to draw weird walls up where they don't necessarily need to be. Like we're kind of, so this is a really small movement, and we all got to kind of be on the same team, and let's talk to each other fairly, and really build up this community to be a community that's moving this thing forward. Like I think there's some different ideologies in the community.
Yeah, definitely.
Like I personally think there's some sort of psychedelic agenda. It's like this whole class of psychedelics has their own agenda, and it's like putting it onto people, but and people are executing it. So that's interesting, but I don't know. That's speculation. Obviously, I don't have a manifesto from the psychedelic drugs to read you. But yeah, okay. So I think that, I don't know, anything else on therapeutic use?
No, I think we covered it. Do you want to jump into, say, psychospiritual and maybe like personal development work?
Sure. Yeah. So this is often what we see in breath work, and I think a lot of folks are doing this in Peru, doing ayahuasca. And I know, what was the name of the place that recently closed? Crossroads. So like Crossroads, people were going down and doing a lot of 5-MeO DMT and iboga or ibogaine treatments, and under the context of psychospiritual work. So similar.
Was that, or was it for addiction treatment?
Both.
Oh, both. Okay.
Yeah. So I know people that have been down for psychospiritual retreats. And I think David at Oka Ibogaine Center in Mexico does psychospiritual retreats too. So it's like you're not super symptomatic. You're not using heavy drugs and putting your life at risk regularly with drugs. Like you're not super addicted to dangerous things, maybe other things, but not dangerous things. And you're getting to have this wild experience with the hope of exploring your mind, exploring what it is to be you. Like Lenny says, exploring your relationship to the world, maybe developing a newer, deeper relationship to the world. And I think, I think that might be it. Like you're kind of just exploring what's going on in your mind. It's kind of like, who am I? How do I get to know myself? Obviously not through my day job. What else is there? Is there another path to gain self-knowledge? That's the way I model it. What am I missing? I must be missing something.
I don't know. I guess I mean, I model it the same way, kind of. You might have this wanting an experience to help you develop meaning in life, or develop a relationship with the universe and how you interact with the universe. I mean, that's the way I think of it. I think about like my earlier years, when I was in that phase of like self-discovery, like just trying to figure out who I was as a teenager, kind of coming into an adulthood, and just feeling so lost and confused. Obviously I wasn't doing it in a therapeutic context, and it seemed more of like a self-discovery context of, I had these big existential questions, or these big life questions, and I was trying to seek answers to them. And so, yeah, I think, in the terms of breath work too, like that we model it as psychospiritual development, or personal development and spiritual development, I think is how we phrase it. Because, people coming there, like you don't want it to be advertised as therapy. Like we're doing therapy, like we're going to cure you of whatever you're doing. This is an opportunity to engage in the process, to figure that out yourself, figure that out who you are and how you want to be in the world. And I think that's important, because then you can go back and then do that therapy afterwards.
It's one of the fundamental philosophical questions from like a philosophy degree. It's like, what is one to do with one's life? How is one to act in the world? Yeah.
I forget what I was going to say. You got anything?
It's cool. I was thinking too, And maybe somebody has a phobia, like a kind of a like maybe they're horrified of cats or like agoraphobia or something, and they're not in therapy for it, and they don't want to go into therapy because they don't like that label. But maybe they're eventually going to go check out some of these different alternative methods like ayahuasca, ibogaine, 5-MeO-DMT, which might be overkill for agoraphobia, but maybe it's fine. And then, maybe breath work too, or trance dancer, one of a million therapy modalities that could help. Yeah, I think one of the problems with the way we do, it's the only way we know how to do research right now, but maybe in the future we'll find something better, but we have to do science on individual diseases, it seems like, or constellations of diseases. So it's like we're doing PTSD, but they're not necessarily going to prescribe MDMA therapy for somebody with agoraphobia, like an acute phobia disorder, or like some kind of weird, I don't know, what's a way to put it? Deviancy. I was just thinking some like crazy sexual deviancy, like someone might want treatment for it. Right. But they're not necessarily going to get the MDMA therapy or whatever is legal at the time. So we hopefully off-label use is going to be prescribable for it. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. And I think this type of technique allows for like the greatest flexibility and maybe even, maybe, I don't know if I want to say benefit, but I think maybe the most benefit too sometimes, because you're not putting like these structures around it. It's like
make it open.
It could be an opportunity to really tap into your creativity, or maybe handle some of these questions that you're asking yourself. And I think like when hearing Rick Doblin talk about this stuff, about the future of like what MAPS wants to do, and I've heard him definitely talk about it at conferences before, how they want to have like centers, and maybe it is a center where they do therapy, and then they have a part where you could come for self-discovery. And I think it's a really great model.
So I like the idea of it being really open-ended, and it's really your body having wisdom, and if you wanted to layer some spirituality on it, it's like your body interacting with the spirits of the plants or molecules, and creating some new whole, or running through some process, kind of like an alchemical process. You get put in the oven, you get broken apart, and then you get put together again. So I think that's it on self-exploration, spiritual use. Let's jump over to ceremonial, or cool. I think that's the way to put it, spiritual/ceremonial. So like this is the context of, say, an ayahuasca shaman, traditional Mexico mushroom use or salvia use, ibogaine use in Africa, or at a center like Oka, where David is doing stuff in Mexico, and he's in that Bwiti tradition, following that same set of ceremonies. So like you're initiated into the Bwiti as soon as you do that work, and that's part of that whole cultural, ceremonial, religious thing. Or
peyote as well.
Peyote. Is there others? There's got to be others.
Yeah, like San Pedro. And
what's that stuff they blow into each other's noses? Is that hape? Or I feel like there's a DMT snuff they blow into each other's noses.
It's made from like a yopo seed.
Yeah.
But that's not hape is usually some sort of tobacco with other herbs. Mm-hmm. I believe the stuff that my friend experienced was Nunu, and that was tobacco with, I think, the inner bark of cacao plant.
Jeez. Yeah. As a snuff?
Yeah.
Holy moly. What was that? Was that like a psychedelic experience? Was it kind of like a cacao ceremony, but like
I don't know. I didn't try it.
Okay.
But
he didn't have any stories.
I think he did. I don't remember him though. Right. The stuff that I had was I don't know. Somebody brought it back from like Australia or Southeast Asia. So I don't even know what type of herbs were in there, but I think it had some sort of tobacco in it.
Yeah.
It was an interesting experience.
So yeah, these are very valuable and very, valid experiences for us in the Western world. We're kind of pulled really far away from our origins. We are all descendants of successful tribes. And as a result, when we get back into those tribal ceremonial settings, working with a group of folks, it can feel really good. It can feel better. In breathwork, we often hear like, this is the first time I've ever felt safe. Like, I could not believe how safe I felt in that group. And a bond can be built so quickly just by dropping a lot of walls and working with each other in that way. And it's pretty incredible. And enormously valuable for healing. Like, you have to, similar to how MDMA therapy works, like the fear center kind of relaxes a little bit and lets you at those things so you can work on them. It's kind of like the group, in a sense, allows for that too. And maybe with a drug, like, you're kind of compounding that a little bit, which is very interesting. You've got a lot more experience with shamanic kind of stuff than I do. What are your thoughts on this stuff?
Like ceremonial use?
Right.
Well, I think it's coming back to the relationship that you have with the plant and the plant spirit, and then how are you working with that? And, you know, depending on where you go, I mean, everybody's studying different things. So, I mean, South American shamanism might be much different than North American shamanism, and the people that use peyote might do a little bit something different than, say, the ayahuasqueros. But the concepts are relatively the same, where you're having a relationship with this plant spirit, and then you're working with the spirit of that plant. And, you know, but then you have that whole kind of cosmology to work with, in a sense, where you're working with different archetypal energies and you're working with the spirit. And, you know, that can be uncomfortable for some people that don't believe in that don't believe that they're working with a spirit. Or also, you know, you might be putting your power in the hands of, say, like a shaman. You're going down there and you're thinking that the shaman is healing you, or he's the one, or she is the one, like, working with the energy, and they're coming around and possibly blowing tobacco smoke on you, or, you know, smudging you and clearing your energy out. So I think with that, it's also a little bit more dynamic, where you're having a relationship with the spirit, with the shaman. You're having somebody doing healing work on you. But, you know, some people always say, there's a guy, Louis Mel Madrona, who wrote a book, Narrative Therapies, and I think Coyote Medicine. But, you know, as he says, you know, Creator does like 75% of the work. The shaman does, say, like 15% of the work, and he's just like the trickster that makes you believe that you're healing yourself. Or no, I'm sorry. 15% of the work is yourself, and then, like, say 5% is the shaman, who's just kind of tricking you. So most of the work to be done is like the person doing the healing work and their relationship with Creator or the universe, whatever that is.
That's funny. There was this argument I read in I was in college. This might have been my third year of college. It was this like high end like how do you put it? Hindu philosopher, Vedanta philosopher, and he had this really structured argument about how we have 35% free will. It's like, dude, how do you come up with that number? It's pretty incredible. It's like, but yeah, you know, in a lot of ways, between genes, culture, family raising, like, we carry a lot of stuff forward. And how do we really account for free will anyway? That's kind of a wild argument. Anyway, that's a tangent. But yeah, I think you're right. Like, there's a lot going on there, and the trickster medicine does. There is something really powerful in that archetype. I think Hermes, like one of the greatest gods in the Greek pantheon, Thoth, Hermes, Mars. I think no, he wasn't Mars. Mercury was his name in the Roman pantheon. You know, that he was the trickster archetype. He was this messenger of the gods who was a trickster. So it's almost like, how do you get that communication clear? It's not looking pretty unless you put in a lot of effort and, like, develop that relationship.
Right. Yeah, I was asking my one teacher about, say, psychedelic use in, like, Western culture, and, you know, he just kind of said, yeah, most people don't have a relationship with the plant. we just take the things and that's it. We just view it as that. But when you're working with a plant spirit, I mean, to really get the maximum benefit out of that is to understand what the spirit of that plant wants. And you don't need to ingest it all the time. Could be taking like parts of that plant and putting it under your pillow and dreaming with it and sleeping with it. Could be just tasting it or making like different teas and stuff out of it that might not be so psychoactive. Yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to relationship and then how do you work with that other energy. And if that's spiritual, if you believe in that, that's how you'd work with it. Right. But I know that's not everybody's cup of tea. And people can get turned off by, say, the dogma of it, and it is kind of like strange working in like the ceremonial context where people have their teachers and then this person is the best shaman and then, ego and weird dogmas come into play. And I think it's an important conversation to really think about your own narrative and your own cultural narrative. And I don't know, because I always think when we get into these realms, like, what are you experiencing versus what somebody else is telling you you're experiencing? And I think like a good say analogy or thing for that is Jeremy Narby with his book Cosmic Serpent, how he talked about these people down in South America who are using ayahuasca. In their narrative, they see the snake, right? But maybe in Western culture, we see the double helix. We see the spiral of that. And so I think it's important when you are doing some of that work is to really understand. Well, obviously, I think it's important to honor the lineage and the tradition of these medicines and whatnot. But also, like, really think about your own story, your own narrative. What do you believe? And how do you develop a relationship by yourself with that as well? And honoring the tradition. It's a weird paradox, but I think.
I just started reading Carl Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And there was a lot in the first couple chapters that was so amazing. And one of the lines was, any truth that he received from outside himself was, barely meaningful to him. But when he found the truth on his own, like when he found the meaning on his own, it was exponentially more valuable and meaningful to him and helpful. So I think there's something there. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's something really important in that message.
Well, I don't know. I spent a lot of time trying to study from all different types of teachers and traditions and this and that. And, I get annoyed by this thing or annoyed by that thing. And part of it is just for myself is developing like my own narrative of it. Like, what do I actually believe from my experiences? Like, why am I always going to somebody else to fix me? Like, it's like in breath work or even in therapy and stuff like that, where I always stress like, you are the master or the author of your story, like, your story the best. Nobody else does. You do. So
I think Tim Leary was one of the not really pioneers, but he was one of the early guys working on group therapy. And I think this is before psychedelics. And the argument was that these people are the experts on them. Why would some expert be better at giving you insight into you? Why not enable them, give them tools to understand themselves better? It's kind of what all this stuff is, and the ceremonial and therapeutic tools. Like, that's kind of what we're really doing. We're kind of reclaiming that, but in a solo context. And, maybe that's why integration circles are so effective and so awesome. So that we can just come together and really feel authentic with each other. And, as a result, feel safe to dig deeper into yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is this, what was that? There's this dream work book you and I have talked about. Where
by Robert Johnson, Active Imagination. I can't think of the book off the top of my head. What was the name again? Well, I know it was based on Jung and Active Imagination, but I can't think of the actual book. But I know it was by Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson.
Yeah. So he had this thing where, like, when you're interpreting your dreams, is it really about going to a dictionary to like look up what that symbol is defined as? Or is it your relationship to that symbol that should take priority? I think that is it. And they had this concept of what do you feel in your body? Like, does your body have a reaction when you put a name to something like that? That snake that you are horrified of in your dreams, like you say, I don't know, mother or something like that. And that really like triggers your body. Then, maybe that's the thing, especially if your body's like kind of giving you the nod from inside. So I think there's something there too. That seems like a super tangent to me, but I think it is relevant in this whole space because people are like, oh, grandmother ayahuasca told me X. I'm like, yeah, but maybe think about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is, I think, valid having a concept of like a spirit if you're coming from that ceremonial context. Mm-hmm. But maybe are you saying that because you've sat in ceremony a bunch and that's like what you're clinging to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's jump to ceremony, or we've done the 3. Let's talk about recreational.
Cool.
That's my favorite. So,
I'll let you jump in on that one.
So, okay, for thousands of years, even in the most recent prohibition of alcohol in the 20s, people have strived to do whatever they can do to alter their consciousness through plants or whatever, or foods, alcohol. Alcohol's been around for quite a while. I actually just read the Odyssey like 2 weeks ago, and there was a lot in there about wine and wine having not just like drunk effects. Like I think there was
psychoactive effects.
Yeah, a lot of admixtures, and like it was kind of by different islands and different like families. Like you would have different wine recipes. So like they were definitely having quite the time.
Well, they're also saying too, like the fermentation process is a little bit different than it is now.
Yeah, they were probably doing open air and some really weird stuff, and probably in like a dirt hole. Not always. I'm sure they had like pots and stuff. But yeah, there's this long tradition, and even probably, yeah, I think through like we all kind of, I hope at this point, know about the Eleusinian mysteries, and that we're pretty sure they were using a psychoactive brew, and it was kind of it was all the way secret at penalty of death to like talk about it, or exile, which might be the same as death in those days. And yeah, that was an ergot based thing, kind of an LSD type thing. And people were no longer afraid of death after that ceremony. So yeah, we have this whole use, and it was kind of in a festival setting too. It was like you go into the chamber, you drink the stuff, and then you're hanging out fasted for a while, probably for a day, with everybody else super high in this religious ecstasy, hopefully.
Right.
And yeah, we have all these Native American rites, and who knows how long ayahuasca's been around. And yeah, marijuana, we've got a really long, cannabis. We've got a really long relationship with cannabis as a species. So like, and it's not all religious. It would be like people chilling out, like herding the sheep, getting stoned in the field. Maybe it helps with the pain. Maybe we're just hardwired as creatures to get high. I think there is a strong argument to be made there. Like we look to get high.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, I forget what the name of that book was, but it was about, I think the Flow States Project, the Stealing Fire book, talked a lot about that, how we are just like always seeking highs.
Yeah.
And it's true. And I think, what's changed? Do we want to be Puritans? Like, are we bringing back the Mayflower? Make the Mayflower great again? It's like, come on, get a grip and relax a little bit. It's okay. Like, if you're against drugs for recreational use, you've probably been drunk a bunch of times. So, like, what's the difference? That's a known more harmful substance than most of these drugs we speak about. And, based on the David Nutt study, if you need to look that up, like the drug harm scale, I think it would be a good Google search there. But yeah, like if you could, like you kind of hinted at earlier, if you could use psychedelics or drugs in a recreational context and have a therapeutic result, why would you want to get in the way of that?
Mm-hmm.
The fear is that 10 people out of a million have a bad result. It's probably greater than that, but what was there were some numbers recently. It was like the EU death toll from drugs, and you wouldn't believe the numbers. Like UK was off the charts compared to the rest of the EU for drug deaths per million.
Really?
Yeah, and I think it's around draconian drug policy, maybe. Like, because the drug laws are so hard, it's more difficult to get a more pure product, maybe. Or maybe it's something to do with the English. I don't know. If you're in England, let us know. We would love to hear your opinions on that. I don't know. Like, I personally have to say that a fair amount of my recreational use or celebratory use, as Doblin kind of coined at Sci Science in Oakland, like, I think it was very helpful. I think it worked a lot of stuff through, and I've never smiled so much in my life. So I don't know. Sometimes it gets weird, but if you're with a crew, kind of like we talk about in our class, if you're like, take this appropriate safety precautions, like, you're in pretty good shape. You're probably very probably going to be just fine. But, when you're popping 4 pills at once of God knows what, it's rolling the dice. Maybe you're going to be stuck on the floor for 3 hours to 12 hours, maybe longer. Maybe you have to go to the hospital. Like, so maybe that's what people are freaking out about. And it's all, to me, comes back to prohibition and issues there, because we can't just buy like Tropicana brand MDMA, or like, what's the big grocery store brand? Kroger store brand LSD. Like, we can't just buy that. If we could, we would know exactly how many milligrams, micrograms we were getting. And hopefully we could, on the label, you'd say, like, it was, this chemist's process or this chemist's process. You would know, like, what the process for synthesizing it was, or whatever, or extraction, or so there's a lot to be said there. Like, did you use that acetone wash, or did you use a more clean process that is less toxic? Like,
oh no, I was just gonna say, like, or ask you, why do you think the recreational use is kind of looked at through, like, say, like, a negative light? Everybody's doing it, obviously, in some sense, but there's also kind of like this you shouldn't be doing that. And I also think that kind of comes back to, say, drug war policies and stuff like that. Like, why,
Anthropologically, I guess we have typically 2 to 3 drugs that every culture is okay with. Ours are caffeine, alcohol, tobacco. And other cultures, it could be like opium, tea, and, X, whatever. And everything else is demonized. That's the bad people's drugs. That's what the barbarians use. And you can see this right at the start of the drug war in the States, where it was, these black jazz musicians are sleeping with white women and making white women smoke marijuana cigarettes, and let's panic because there's going to be mixed race babies. And that's kind of what the newspaper people, like, put out. What was the guy's name? Hearst, William Randolph Hearst. He was the kind of father of yellow journalism, and he played a critical role in that drug war, along with who is that main character in Chasing the Scream? I forget, but he was kind of like the guy who just went after everything. And he, in the long run, it turned out that he was actually providing McCarthy heroin. He's the same guy that was, like, persecuting all the communists. So these two, like, supposedly red-blooded Americans, drink beer, whiskey, and do manly stuff. Like, they were still in it, even though they were the guys that were most against it. But So there's that aspect. There's also a lot of baggage from the 60s. And I think the 60s being this counterculture thing, at least in the States and some of Europe, where it looked like the establishment was going to lose all control. And as a result, it was like, all right, let's pull out the stops here. We're going to do everything in the media we can do to make this shit look really bad, and they're going to keep on it. And, I think a lot of it just comes down to spending on media. Like, how much money did you spend on media to spread that message? And the answer is a lot. If you looked at the cost of William Randolph Hearst doing that stuff and the early marijuana drug war and the Reagan Just Say No campaign, tremendous amount of like, obviously they didn't spend it all because they probably got favors, but if it was to cost dollars, it would have been tremendous. Even if you're not getting the media on just putting a lot of people in jail, like, just that alone was huge for influencing the shape of it. And I'm still kind of mad at Oprah for misrepresenting those. I think it was those rat trials that we talked about. Like, they were feeding the
methamphetamine,
crazy toxic doses of methamphetamine, and you could see the brain damage. And it was because they had an error in the lab, and no one came around and said, "Oh, sorry about that, everybody. Wrong drug." Nope. They just kept on persecuting, putting people in jail, and I hold a little grudge. Like, why are you putting so many people in jail? Yeah. Relax. Relax. They're humans. They probably have jobs. And they probably have a family. Like, do you really want to put them in jail? So I react kind of strongly against that. Even if it's crack, like, so what? You make it worse by putting them at risk of going to jail. It would be probably 1/10 the price or 100th the price if it wasn't illegal and it was like a regulated market, and people would have less negative interactions. They would know their dose. And the hospital would need to get involved. We could spend that money on treatment if people chose to get therapy. Like, I really like that model in Portugal and like Switzerland. I don't know if Spain's doing I feel like Spain has something really interesting happening, but I'm not totally up on that. So it's people, just in general, people telling other people what they can and can't do, which to me, I don't like it. I don't like that. Like, you're going to tell me how many cups of coffee I can and cannot drink, or, to a degree, I get it. Whereas, like, on the interstate here, it's not okay to go 150 miles an hour because you're going to put X number of other people's lives in immediate danger. Perhaps people still need to go to jail if they're on drugs and they're being unruly in public. Like, you don't want to do 10 hits of acid and go out onto Main Street. Like, that's not going to be good for anybody. And that probably shouldn't be legal. Like, if you're fucking around in public like that, like, no, like, that's not okay. I've seen some very disruptive folks in public that were clearly on strong hallucinogens or opiates or whatever, crack. And I was like, yeah, that's the kind of attitude and behaviors that should probably get you taken out of public. Like, I get that part, but, I don't know what the penalty should be. At least, so, like, just the same way you treat drunks, throw them in the drunk tank for a little bit, which isn't a pleasant thing if you're super tripping. Like, it's not a very therapeutic environment. It could be traumatic, but at least you're not compounding the social, the negative social perceptions of drugs.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's kind of a rant and a half there, but
yeah, I mean, it's an interesting debate. Because I know, well, I don't know. What's your take on people that use psychedelics regularly? Like, because I know we've gotten into this a few times where it's just like, well, how many times do you really need to take a substance? How many times do you need to escape?
Or what frequency? Or what's your dose? What's your frequency? Like, what's your reason? And yeah, we did kind of want to talk about this. Like, I think people should feel that out for themselves, but they should probably have kind of a support network. It's not going to be Joe listening to Terrence McKenna podcasts, taking a lot of mushrooms every week, like once a week, like 5 grams. Like, I think that's a little much. If you're just all alone listening to Psychedelic Salon, Terrence McKenna, like you might get pretty symptomatic after a while, because that's not, we're not meant to just listen to one person and do intensely powerful drugs that do some really interesting things to our brains. Like if we're in community and we're talking about it and we're having regular grounded discussions. Like I was at a retreat a while ago, and there's a lot of this discussion around like this guy Melchizedek, who had these spiritual transmissions from angels, and people would just like read it and go, "Oh yeah, this is great. It's coming from angels," and like makes a lot of sense. And I'm like, dude, like, do you really want to put your trust in a book that somebody else wrote or transcribed from visions he had? Like, maybe he was just on acid. How do you know what he was on? And people's minds can do incredible things on acid, but it doesn't necessarily make it the truth or your truth. It could be very true for that guy Melchizedek, but why not put in the effort to figure that shit out for yourself and do it in a healthy way in community? This whole messianic thing and putting people first, like similar to the ayahuasca shamans, like, do you really want to make them the new Jesus? Or do they really want to be your like leader of the Church of Scientology? Like, you don't want to elevate people to that level, even if it's just a book and the author of a book. Like there's I think some psychedelic or some psychological harms there by disempowering yourself. Like you lose your sense of agency by, okay, I didn't get the message, but at least I have this book. So I guess that's okay. So I'll treat it like it's the way I should feel about my soul is the way I feel about this book. And I think that might be a better way to put it than I put it before.
I don't know. And this whole conversation about like recreational use too is making me think a lot about the different compounds and different classes of drugs.
Absolutely.
Like we focus mainly on like psychedelics on this podcast, and maybe cannabis or ketamine or whatever, which we should get somebody that talks about ketamine on here soon. But then I'm wondering too, I know like Europe has these laws around opiates, and they have like safe injection, and they moderate a lot of that. But it's just interesting to think about like the different uses of drugs and like when's overdoing it. Overdoing it on psychedelic, what does that really mean to society? Maybe somebody runs out of their house and maybe gets naked. But what's it like overdoing, say, like heroin? I mean, there's a huge epidemic going on right now, and people are dying from fentanyl overdoses and this and that. So it is interesting to view like these different substances and how they affect people in the recreational setting.
People can do heroin at these safe injection sites, maintain a career, and keep it secret, and nobody even knows that they're doing this. And they're doing it in a totally safe environment. No overdoses reported from these safe injection sites. There's a big campaign for one in Denver right now, by the way. So I'm going to try to reach out to those folks. That's really interesting. I think we've talked about it on the show before, but the major, we could have a metric almost of like, how is the quality of your most important relationships? Like maybe before you start doing drugs, you kind of take an inventory, and then you check in, I don't know, every couple of weeks. Like, has the quality of my relationships degraded? And we see that even with leaders in the psychedelic field. You've been around for a long time talking about this stuff, educating people, and turns out your whole world has been collapsing. Hopefully your significant other or family has told you. But maybe not. Maybe they're not going to tell you. We see that with McKenna. We see that with Leary. There's a lot of contemporaries that have had family issues due to psychedelic use. And, I don't know what the answer is, but the answer clearly isn't chasing younger women or whatever. Like, that's not the answer for a healthy life or a happy life. Like, yeah, sure, maybe exciting, but that's not what you should be doing if you want to progress your life forward in a holistically appropriate way. Like, I think it's kind of pathological, especially if you have a series of things like that. And just reading about Leary, you can see that he had a pattern of that. And I'm sure it's, well, I think even Pinchbeck kind of came out about that, like early in his earlier days. He was, you know, doing some kind of inappropriate, not perfectly healthy for him in his social life.
I kind of like that, the do an inventory of your relationships, and because I think, you know, if you think about it like a mental health perspective, I mean, that's something clinically significant that's having a negative impact on your life. Is obviously not healthy for you.
I don't know how to do that. Is there a measure, like in your experience with psychology, like is there a measure for relationship quality?
Particularly relationships. I don't know. I mean, if you go through, you know, like the DSM, if you're trying to diagnose a disorder, there's a bunch of like things you could view and check off. And some of it's like, oh, you've been sleeping too much. Do you do this too much? Do you know?
Right.
So.
Yeah. So like, I think that's something people should explore. If there's any grad students out there, please feel free to develop that idea. Let us know when you have it finished or working on it. We'd love to chat with you about it, because I think there is something there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. So while we were talking about all this stuff, I kept thinking about like the opium use in Asia, and I haven't done like any research on it in a while, but I just remember like in school how they just said it, like how damaging it was to society, and everybody just sat around opium dens smoking.
There's no context around drugs, and there's no treatment. Like obviously some mothers were like, oh no, I haven't seen my child in 3 weeks. Like maybe he'll come home soon. He probably like, you know, went and stole a couple pots and sold them and went back to the opium den. But, you know, there's no medical science around this stuff. I just read Oliver Sacks's Hallucinations the other day. And fascinating book, fascinating guy, obviously famous neurologist, I think. And he talked about at one point holing up in his apartment, and I think he was either smoking morphine or injecting or something, and he realized that he pretty much like lost 18 hours. He was like, oh, this isn't right. I think I just lost some time. The sun was going down, not coming up. What's going on? Am I tripping? Nope. You just lost all your time. And he goes, yep. Obviously, it's very easy to just lose days, weeks, months, or years of your life with opiates. So we have to be really careful around them. You know, that's kind of, you know, what's going on with pills. Like it's really hard to be careful with these things, and it's really easy to get physically addicted. And I think Gabor Mate talks about how predisposed we all are to addictive patterns. You know, if it's buying classical music albums like him, or buying drugs and using. Or, you know, maybe it's like me, like you just get addicted to flow states and you put yourself in increasingly dangerous situations till you get really hurt for a couple of years, you know, like that kind of thing. Or you in ICU, like you get addicted to these things, and everybody has addictions. Odds are good everybody has an addiction. Like I don't...
Healthy addiction, though.
We would hope so. That's perhaps what we should strive for. Like it's this dichotomy, though, of like, you know, say the DMT people who want to smoke NN-DMT or 5-MeO regularly, like it's almost as if it's an escape, and then they have this split between here's my physical lower existence, and here's my spiritual upper existence and experience, and one is clearly better than the other. And I think it's really problematic to divide it like that. I think we have to think of it as a whole in order to have a healthy relationship to this stuff. We don't want to say, okay, I'm only me when I'm smoking DMT, or the fucked up. There's this lyric in one of the songs by The Weeknd I was listening to recently. You're familiar with The Weeknd?
No.
Really? He's this guy. He's got this really popular song about cocaine.
Maybe if I heard it, maybe
you probably would. I don't know the lyrics, but I'm super. It's like when I'm fucked up, that's the real me, or something like that. He's talking about like calling women at 5 a.m. and going over their house. Oh, he's a Canadian. He's from Toronto. Good for him. He's super rich now. It's crazy. He's very successful. But yeah, is it really you? Is the fucked up you really you? Is it any different from the day-to-day you? Like the person that goes to work and does their day job they hate is the same exact person when they are smoking DMT or doing breath work or doing something they love. It's just a different period of time, different part of the process. And I think there is a lot of value in trying to integrate all these parts, pull them back into one thing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it really comes back to like intention. Like a lot of these things I view as tools. I just had this thought, like I was probably like the last person that people would ever suspect to have a podcast based around psychedelics, you know? I was really against a lot of this stuff when I was in high school. Like my friends started drinking and started smoking, and you know, there was a moment where I kind of pushed them away because I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And a lot of this comes from like my existential crisis of almost dying and having such a powerful peak experience at that age. And then coming back and trying to wrap my head around why people would want to alter their consciousness and experience, like escape reality. Because I thought reality was the greatest thing at that point. I was like, oh my God, like we are so lucky to be here right now. Like this is amazing. And people are just escaping from it because they don't realize how magical it actually is. But then, you know, I hit my wall and I finally ended up escaping like everybody else a little bit, but realizing how powerful that was. And so I've always kind of viewed them as tools. Like I like they're there when you need them in a sense. And so, yeah, what's the balance? Like when is it like you're just constantly like escaping, or when do you need like a little tune up and like a little recheck? Because like, you know, I had this experience where, you know, had this accident, then went through this like the state of ecstasy where I was so blissed out, and then I finally hit a wall. And then I was like down the dumps, and then it was like that experience with psilocybin that like brought me back to life. I was like, oh my God, like I wasn't thinking clearly for the past like year or so. Like I was letting my emotions get the best of me. Mm-hmm. And that experience was like, hey, get back with it. Like you remember what this is all about. And I'm like, oh yeah, I do. Like this is why I'm so appreciative of everything. And maybe that's why I've never really fell into like heavy use, is because of that previous experience when I was 16. But yeah, I don't know. I think I view it as tool. I don't necessarily think that people using it in a recreational setting is bad. I don't think like how some of the stuff is used is terrible, because sometimes it has benefit. But I think
about it like this, Kyle. Like you had. Like you were snowboarding. Obviously, snowboarding super fun, especially if you're not falling super hard. And you probably had a few other things going on in your life that were awesome. So think about somebody who, you know, their peak experience was when somebody else won a Super Bowl. Like that was the best moment of their life, was when somebody won the Super Bowl. It's like, come on. Like, is that really the best thing that's ever happened in your life? And then that person runs into something so powerful, so amazing, like a psychedelic, and then they're just like, I don't have this. You know, for me, I grew up skiing. You know, I'm very privileged to be able to ski my whole life, and then, you know, I in a lot of ways I base my life around it. So I've been, you know, that is the addiction I would choose over most things: skiing, snowboarding. For a while, I was skateboarding and rock climbing. Like, you know, these non-drug, you know, cheaper, you know, arguably more dangerous things that took priority. And I think there's something there about like past experience and past biases towards stuff. You know, who knows what's the right answer there, but there's something to that argument.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I was definitely highly addicted to extreme sports. I was a skateboarder my whole life, and then snowboarding, and then, yeah, that's definitely my thing.
And I think that's what happens too. Like you get this like 12-year-old, all of a sudden he gets a skateboard. He's like, oh my God, this has just changed my whole world.
Yeah.
Or a BMX bike. And, you know, all of a sudden 14 broken arms later, you know, what's healthy and what isn't, where is the line? Like you're as that person, you could just push everybody away out of your life to put those things in the forefront. I don't know. It's one of these arguments about what do you want? What is a happy life to you? And have you taken the time to even like question that at all? You is your happy life exclusively being a billionaire, hanging out with Richard Branson on his island all the time? Like, is that the only way you can be happy? Like, probably not. There's probably a lot of other things. Like, maybe you take an inventory. What sucks in your life a lot? Can you eliminate the things that suck the most in your life? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe one or two of them. Maybe it's a shit relationship you have with family or friend. Then maybe that helps. So you're right, though. It's a really complicated discussion. What is overuse? Like, we can look at it and go, that's clearly overuse. But we can't necessarily say, like, that's borderline.
Right. Well, I kind of like this concept of, like, checking your relationships, Seems like a pretty good measure of things. Or, like,
maybe I keep saying this. I've been crushing out audiobooks lately at like 4x speed, 2x, 4x. I just finished this book called Personal MBA by Jack Welch and his wife, Susie. And it's how you can, I don't know, it's just a lot of business metrics, business talk. And one of the things was like, how do you check numbers over time? Like maybe you look at progress in your job. Maybe you look at career development, and maybe you even take your bank account into the equation, or like your credit card debt. Like just put out a chart and go like month to month, like how am I looking? Like this, I hate to say it like that, but we're in this world where money kind of matters a lot, and it's going ostensibly money is going to matter for a long time. And assuming US dollar doesn't collapse, and so I got some Bitcoins. But so
unless that gets hacked and destroyed.
So you know what's cool, man? If you get some Bitcoin, US dollar collapses quite a bit. Your student debt tracks to that. You pay off your student loans with like $50
I don't want to
currently.
talk about the Bitcoins. Me and my friends were going to buy a bunch when they were like $10, $4. And I just keep thinking about that. I'm like, dude, I'd have so much money right now if we actually pulled the trigger on that years ago. I know a lot of people or at least 3 or 4 people who paid off their student loans, like $60K in Bitcoins and Ethereum. Jeez. It's crazy. But, that's a side note. But, take an inventory. Maybe it's not just your relationships. Maybe it's a multi-factor thing. I think CrossFit is really interesting in that they have methods to measure a lot of things. Maybe it's like you could put a 1 to 100 scale of how well you did in a difficult yoga class. Maybe that's one thing. If your physical body's falling apart, that's not great. Maybe you throw everything into it, like your blood pressure. You go get your blood pressure checked at a pharmacy or something, and track all these metrics over time, and for you, figure out what you think good is, and figure out what you think bad is, and try to keep trending towards good. If those metrics help you work towards what you think the right result is. I think relationships play into it, obviously. Relationships are more important than money most of the time. Money is kind of secondary, but important too. Like you don't want to be racking up every single credit card to 40,000K in the negative, all of them. Yeah. Like that trend's negative. So unless you plan to run away to Russia or something forever, pull a Snowden. So I think we're kind of run our course on this conversation. So let's we're like an hour 15 of recording. So maybe, that kind of covers that oblivion thing. We'll cover that other subject later. But our class, if you guys want to help us out, we've got a class that we put together, included 12 or maybe even 13 master classes from experts in their respective sub areas of psychedelics. And the course is really around helping you make better, more informed decisions around drugs and psychedelics, and how to stay out of the hands of the police and hospitals. And we're putting ourselves at risk when we're taking black market substances. So, we talk about stuff like test kits and how to test for fentanyl in drugs. That was Mitch Gomez from Dance Safe, the executive director there, really helped us with that one. How to identify emergencies with drugs, how to integrate, how to prepare. Integration starts before the experience. I was just reading Holotropic Breathwork, the book last night, and Groff was pretty clear on that. It's great. And we get into a lot of stuff from how to do psychedelic first aid, even how to choose the right ayahuasca center,
how do you know what ayahuasca brew is safe to drink and what isn't, how to be safe in the Amazon as a lady. And wait, was that true? No, that was the last episode with Zoe Helena. Is that her last name?
Yeah, Helena.
Anything you want to add, Kyle, on the class?
Yeah. So we have, I think, like 12 exclusive interviews, which is awesome. Ingmar Gorman from the Psychedelic, I always screw this up, Psychedelic Education Continuing Care Program, with Catherine McLean. Have Neil Goldsmith on there, author of Psychedelic Healing. Right?
Yes.
We have our breathwork teachers, Lenny Elizabeth Gibson. We have Ashley Booth from the Aware Project, talking about her time at Crossroads, and a few others. We have another friend of mine who talks about spiritual emergence processes, which I think is a huge topic for this field, because I think a lot of people come to spiritual emergence through psychedelics or breathwork, and it's a really nice map if something does come up for navigating crisis.
Something spiritual happens and you don't know how to talk about it or how to even think about it. You're very confused. And then phenomena can keep coming up. Like, that is something that happens, and it's something we need to be aware of. Like, how to relate to that in a healthy way is important, and this kind of stuff is huge. That's why the Groffs spun up the Spiritual Emergence Network, and it's kind of partly why we're here. And also, we have a private Facebook group for students of the class, and you'll have access to us there. We communicate quite a bit on there, and you could talk to other students and like kind of get ideas on how other people solved certain problems. And I think we're providing a journal soon. Kyle, you're putting the finishing touches on a journal project. And
trying to finish it up while school just started. So
yeah. We'll get it to you guys soon. And also we have some active meditation. So a breathwork kind of meditation that Kyle's putting together, and Catherine McLean provided a really interesting a meditation as well. So I think that's it for that. You can get that at psychedelicstoday.teachable.com, or you can find links all over our site at psychedelicstoday.com. Also, you could sign up for one of those legal mushroom retreats, psilocybin-assisted retreats in Jamaica with Eric. Let him know you found us, or you found him through us, and that'll help us quite a bit. And always just leave us a review somewhere, Facebook, iTunes, wherever, and we would love it. Or just hit us up on social. We'd love to hear from you. Any last words, Kyle?
Thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoy a little bit of Joe's and I ramble. Things have just been kind of hectic on our end. So we just figured we'd get on and chat. We hope you guys enjoy this. We'll have some interviews lined up soon, so don't worry. But thanks for listening. And let us know how we're doing.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys. Take